Welcome back to the vKTLW Quaestor Officer Training. In this module, we will be discussing accounts payable and cash flow. The goal of this module will be to discuss resources available to you to track monies owed by the chapter and the inflow and outflow of cash. Let's start by looking at accounts payable.
Accounts payable are monies that are owed by the chapter to other persons or entities. Through normal operations, your chapter will accrue liabilities which carry specific terms of payment. It will be the responsibility of the Quaestor and the Financial Committee to ensure liabilities are paid on time. As the ability to pay chapter liabilities is reliant on cash being available, collections of monies owed to the chapter takes priority in the hierarchy of financial management. It is common practice in many chapters to use monies collected for other liabilities to pay the most pressing invoices. It cannot be stressed enough that holding our brothers and others who owe the chapter money accountable to the financial obligations they have taken upon themselves is of the utmost importance. Your success as Quaestor of your chapter will rely heavily on your ability to encourage those who owe the chapter money to pay in a timely fashion. As you and your financial committee establish a culture of responsible financial accounting, the difficulties in managing the finances of the chapter will begin to dissipate. Do not fall into the trap of taking monies collected for other obligations and applying them to unrelated expenses. This practice will catch up to you as a financial manager and will not reflect well on your abilities as an officer. Utilize all the resources you have to collect monies owed to the chapter and make a concerted effort to fulfill the financial obligations of the chapter. Set up common and easily executable systems to make payments on chapter liabilities. Using checks, online payments, or ACH transactions are commonly used systems. The more normalized the method of payment, the easier it will be for you to track during your term. It will also aid in training the next Quaestor as you transition out of your term. In regard to the use of chapter debit cards, their convenience and portability can easily and rapidly cause loss of control of chapter funds. It is imperative that you take on the responsibility of access to debit and credit cards if your chapter uses them. All expenditures of the chapter should be approved by you as the Quaestor or by your financial committee. Also ensure that you review the payables on a weekly basis to ensure you record new payables, pay monies that are due, and plan for upcoming due dates. As some financial softwares do not have an accounts payable register, one has been provided in the Budget Builder so you can track your payables. The accounts payable register gives us the ability to enter in an invoice date, a due date, an invoice number, a payment date, a check number, or we can record that it was a debit transaction or an ACH transaction. We can enter in the vendor or payee name, or a description if that's relevant. We have a memo column where we can add notes if there's a note we want to add to the invoice. We have the original invoice amount, any payment amounts, an invoice balance, which is the difference between the invoice amount and the payment amount, especially if we only make a partial payment. We will know what the invoice balance is. And then the total balance is going to be the difference between the invoice amount, the payment amount. If there is one, it'll carry over to the total balance. And as you can see running down the column here, this is keeping a running tally of all the open payables the chapter has. So let's dive into a couple examples. If we look at this one here on 5/6, it was due 30 days later. Here's the invoice number. Looks like we made a payment on the due date with check number 1002, which we wrote to ABC Rentals for programming or a chapter retreat. The original invoice amount was $600, of which we paid $375, and that left a balance of $225. That balance is now carried over into our total balance. So as of this point on this date, we have $225 of open payables that the chapter is responsible for. Let's take a look at another example. Let's take a look here at 511. Again, 30-day terms, invoice number, payment date, check number 1004 to Alpha Food Service for kitchen or food supplies. The original invoice was $7,500, of which we were able to pay $6,500. That left an invoice balance of $1,000. As you can see, we had a couple other transactions here we weren't able to pay in full, and once we add in this $1,000 to the $675 above it, we have a total payables at this point of $1,675. As you can see, the payables register gives us the opportunity to record every transaction with regard to our payables or monies that we owe to other persons and entities. By using this register, we can record how much our invoices are, how much we've paid, how much is remaining, and what the total payables for the chapter is. There's also a column here that says REC, which means reconciled. So when you get your bank statements after a check is cleared, you can place a check mark in that box so you know that it has cleared the bank. Now let's log back into GreekBill and take a look at an example of how we can use the payables register in conjunction with our financial software. From the dashboard, we're going to click on Banking. Here you can see we have the ability to manage checks and deposits. On the far right, you see we have the ability to create a check. Before we do, let's go back over to our accounts payable register and let's take a look at an example. Here you can see we have an invoice balance that's still remaining. So let's take a look at that. We've got ABC Rentals. This is for programming for a chapter retreat. We had an original invoice of $600, a payment amount of $375, and we still have a balance of $225. Let's go back to GreekBill and let's go ahead and pay that. So we're going to write a check. So we select our bank and it brings up the amount so we know that we have money in our account. Select the date. We enter in a check number. Select vendor, ABC Rentals. Down here we have to pick a general ledger account. We have to tell it what the check's for, which it was for programming for a chapter retreat, for a hall rental for $225. Click Submit. And now we can go back to our banking, click into our bank account. Let's go down and take a look at the transaction being recorded. Here you can see check number 1017 to ABC Rentals for programming for our hall rental for $225. Here you can see it came out of our checking account. Now we want to go back to the payables register, find our transaction, original amount of $600. We have now added the $225 to our payment amount, so we have paid $600. And when we enter that in, you can see that the invoice balance automatically calculates to 0. As mentioned before, it is imperative to make a concerted effort to pay monies owed on time. Whether you are able to record open invoices and payments in your software, or you must use a payables register, such as the one in your budget builder, in conjunction with your software, as we just have done with GreekBill, you should be updating payables weekly and ensuring the chapter is remaining accountable for the monies that it owes. Cash flow is simply defined as monies flowing into and out of the chapter. Before we take a look at a cash flow example, let's take a look at a few cash flow considerations. Let's start with a few effective methods of managing cash flow. As I just mentioned, cash flow is the inflow and outflow of cash. With that in mind, we want to ensure that we have a steady inflow of cash. In order to help ensure that we have a steady inflow of cash, we want to make sure we send invoices for monies owed to the chapter in a timely manner. The sooner we send invoices for monies owed, the sooner we are able to collect on them. Accepting electronic payments is another way to ease collections by making it convenient for members to pay directly through our financial software, through the use of debit or credit cards, or through app services such as Venmo and PayPal. We may also want to give out incentives, such as providing discounts for early payments. With regard to outflows of cash, if we are able to lower or cut costs from our budget throughout the year, this is an effective way to improve cash flow as well. You should also be looking at your cash flow on a weekly basis to ensure that the inflow and outflow of cash is in line with your financial plan. You should also try to ensure that when you collect money, you appropriate that money to the proper payables. An example would be receiving philanthropic donations. If you collect money for a charity, those proceeds should only be used for programming related to the charity, if appropriate, and to make a charitable donation to the proper organization or fund. You should also ensure that when monies are paid out of the chapter funds, those expenses are approved. An example would be an officer purchasing supplies related to their position. In reimbursing the officer, you will want to ensure the purchases were pre-approved and that the items purchased were part of the officer's agreed-upon budget. It might be a little easier to understand cash flow by looking at an actual example, so we're back in our Budget Builder template where we have a cash flow report. Now it might look a little bit confusing, but hopefully the first thing you'll notice is it looks very similar to our budget. Let's take a look at some of the details. Here you can see our chapter information has already been brought over from the budget, as well as our income accounts and our expense accounts, and the budgeted amounts that we previously calculated have been brought over as well. We have an actual amount column in which we can enter in actual amounts either from our financial software or from our check register that reflect the actual amount at this point in time in our financial period. So let's take a look at a couple of examples from the income cash flow details and the expense cash flow details. We'll start off by looking at this very first account item, which is bad debt income. Bad debt income would be income we hope to collect from previously written off bad debts. Here you can see we budgeted $1,000 of bad debt income. In our example, we've been able to collect $1,225. So as we compare the actual amount to the budget amount, you can see our over-under is a positive $225. That means we've been able to collect $225 more than what we anticipated in our budget. Let's take a look at two more examples. Let's take a look at our housing and our insurance. We are expecting in our budget to collect $26,600 in rent. In our example, at this point in the year, we've collected $12,885. That leaves a remaining balance of $13,715 to collect for rent. As we look at insurance, or our RMF fees, we anticipated collecting $25,610. We've actually collected $11,750. When we compare our actual to our budget, we still have $13,860 to collect. As you can see in our bad debt example, we had a positive number, $225. And as an example, our rent is a negative $13,715. Based on the numbers that have been entered into the example, I would anticipate that we're not yet halfway through the year. So although our over-under for our rent has turned red, that just signifies that we're going to have more rent to collect before the end of our financial term. Let's take a look at some expenses. Let's take a look at discounts for good grades. In our budget, we anticipated we were going to have $500 worth of discounts for good grades. In our example, we've actually had $600. It's actually a good thing because that means our brothers are doing well in school, but as financial managers, here we can see in the over-under column, we've had to give $100 more in discounts than what we anticipated. That has to factor into our decision making at some point. Let's look at a couple examples that correlate to our income. Let's look at rent. We anticipated $29,000 worth of expenses for rent. In our example to date, we've paid out $14,765. In our over-under column, it's still a positive $14,235, meaning we have not yet spent as much as we anticipated. Now, something interesting is happening here from our cash flow report. It gives us the opportunity to take a look at income as it compares to expenses. And with our example of rent, here we can notice we've collected $12,885, but we've had to spend $14,765. By looking at the cash flow report and seeing our actual versus budget, and in this example, our collected rent versus the rent we had to pay, we can see that we're going to have to go back to the brothers that live in the house and increase our collection efforts to try and make up for the difference between the $12,885 we were able to collect and the $14,765 that we've had to pay so far. So that's just one example how the cash flow report gives us the opportunity to not only look at what our budgeted amounts were versus our actual amounts, but we can actually look at the income items that we have versus the expense items that they correlate to and make determinations on what we need to do, let's say for collections and rent, in comparison to what we've had to pay. Now this template is making some other calculations for us automatically. Here you can see we have income actual versus budget. So the $63,635 represents our actual income to this point. Our budgeted income was the $155,880. Here you can see in our actual versus budget, as it relates to income, we have a negative number of $92,245. Very similar to the housing and rent example from above, it's okay that this number is negative at this point because we would anticipate that at this point in the year we're going to have more income to collect. The next box represents our expense budget versus our actual. Here you can see we've budgeted we've budgeted total expenses to be $137,840. To date, our actual expenses are $51,905. So here in our over-under budget versus actual, we have a positive $85,935, which just signifies that we have not yet spent as much as we budgeted for the year. And finally, we'll look at the cash flow actual, which compares the total income actual versus the total expense actual. So here you can see our actual total, $63,635, has been brought over, as well as our $51,905 in expense. And the difference here, this is turned blue because it's a positive number. We have $11,730 in our over-under income versus expense, meaning that we've collected more than what we've spent, which is a good thing. But let's keep in mind in our example with the rent, there are certain items where we should have collected more already than what we have, but it is good to know that while we're going to keep those collection efforts going, to this point, when we compare our actual income versus our actual expense, we're in a positive so far for the year. Now let's take a look at an example of a cash flow report in our financial software. In GreekBill, we'll go to Reporting. At the bottom of the report list, we'll see the Profit Loss Cash Report. Now when it initially pulls up, it's going to show a profit and loss report, which is something we'll talk about in a later module. But if we click on the Profit Loss versus Budget report, this is the cash flow report in GreekBill. Here you can see the account number column, which is unique to GreekBill. The account numbers are unique to GreekBill. We have account descriptions, sub-accounts, which represents the general ledger accounts they're tied to, The total amount represents the actual amount. The budget amount represents the amounts we brought over from our budget builder template. And the difference is the difference between the budget and the actual. So let's take a look at a couple examples. Here you can see we have chapter dues with an actual amount of $12,500, signifying that's the amount we've actually collected to this point in the financial term, versus the $23,000 we anticipated in our budget that we would collect, and that leaves a difference of $10,500 yet to collect for chapter dues. Let's look at a couple more. In our budget builder template, we looked at rent, which was $12,885 of rent collected in comparison to $26,600 that we anticipate to collect throughout the financial term, and that leaves $13,715 yet to collect. Let's look at one more from our previous example. Here we have our income from insurance. $11,750 have actually been collected to this point. We budgeted $25,610 to be collected in the total financial term, which leaves a difference of $13,860 yet to collect. Here you can see our income total for this report. So our actual income to date is $57,835 of a budgeted $154,880. We anticipate we're going to have $97,045 yet to collect. And now we start the cash flow report with regard to expenses. So let's take a look at a couple examples here. Let's take a look at insurance. So to date, we've spent $12,500 in insurance of an estimated $25,610, meaning that we anticipate we still have $13,110 yet to collect. Let's take a look at one more example. Here we have our rent that we talked about above with relation to income. Here we have $14,765 of actual expenses in relation to $29,000 that we budgeted, and that leaves a difference of $14,235 in rent that we still anticipate we're going to have to pay. If we look at the bottom, we can see our actual expense total, which to date is $52,605. We budgeted $137,840 of total expenses, and that leaves a difference of $85,235 of anticipated expenses for the remainder of the financial term. And here you can see we have our actual income versus our actual expense, and our current net operating income is $5,230. By utilizing reports such as our cash flow report in our budget builder template or a budget versus actual report in our financial software, we will be able to make sound financial decisions with regard to the inflow and outflow of monies to and from our chapter.
This concludes the module on accounts payable and cash flow. For more information regarding these topics, check out the online resources available through sigmachi.org, your chapter officer SharePoint files, or from your own chapter records if available. Remember to take part in the online discussion related to this officer training module with your facilitator and the members of your Quaestor group.